I'm sure you had lots of opportunities. Why did you decide at that point in your career to go into partner channel and alliance?
And I think this role came up and I thought, actually, it looks really interesting. And yeah, and again, it was another one of those kind of calculated risks where I thought I've done the IC bit, I've done a VP jobs. Actually, this is going to round off a bit of experience. And I saw it personally as just giving me a different set of skills.
How did you drive that sort of high bar in the teams that you looked after?
I think any leader you'll speak to, it's got to be about accountability.
Charlie, hi. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good. Down in sunny Brighton, I believe. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been there for the last 9 years. So I'm London born and bred, but moved down here when the kids got to school age. But it's a nice sunny day. Snow has gone.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks for making time to record the episode with us today. Really looking forward to sort of covering the topic, and we've chosen to kind of encapsulate the last kind of 10 years of your experience under the topic of the opportunity and challenges of scaling a business from 25 million to more than 300 million ARR, which is pretty cool. And lively and huge sort of topic, I'm sure, to cover in the just under 60 minutes we now have left, but we'll give it a punt. Hey, look, so the people that haven't tuned into this episode or any of the episodes that we've done in the past, my name's Simon Gregory. I'm a director here at Thornton Gregory. As a business, and my background is specifically focused on working with MarTech and SaaS vendors and helping them build go-to-market teams. So I've done that across EMEA and US for many, many different companies over the years. But I kind of got to nearly the 10-year mark and realized that I'd met so many awesome people over that time and heard such cool stories and totally unique stories of their careers and the stuff they're building, and felt like I could maybe give back to the community a little bit more by creating a platform and a series of episodes that would speak to people like Charlie about topics that would shed some light on interesting and relevant things around a certain topic like we discussed today. So if you haven't checked them out, on the YouTube channel, there's stuff all around like go-to-market leadership and growth and things like we're going to talk with Charlie today. There's also like RevOps, sales enablement, and stuff around pre-sales and some of the other topics that's evolving in our space rapidly. So check them out, basically. I guess, look, I've only very recently bumped into Charlie, which I was surprised about, in fairness, given our market alignment, and what I just described. But during that kind of conversation I had, it became really kind of made me really aware of actually how awesome I'm sure challenging, but also awesome the growth was over at Brandwatch. And maybe working in the startup space like I have for that long period of time, there are obviously examples where companies have, but so few companies have like gone from low tens to 300 and plus, right, in such a short period of time. So I just thought, what a brilliant opportunity to dig into that a bit more and just try and understand a little bit like what went so well and like what kind of retrospectively were like the crazy moments. So thanks again. Okay, cool. So look, just as a form of introduction, right? I've mentioned there a little bit about the company name, but for those listeners that don't know you, would you mind just sort of setting the scene and giving them a little intro to your career to date, please?
Yeah, of course. It's strange. It's turned into 2025, which makes me realize I've been working for a quarter of a century. And I don't feel that old, but I've actually had two careers. I started off working in sort of advertising and media in London, working for some of the agency networks, then going over to sort of media owner side to sort of News Corp and Hearst. And a lot has changed in that time. I remember someone walking to a room, must have been around 2000, and sort of saying, "Have you heard of a company named Google?" So I think I remember that conversation very well. And if you think where we are now, I did that probably for the first like 14 years of my career. And as I said, when I moved down to Brighton, I went out to my network and said, "Look, are there any cool companies to work for in the area?" And someone said, "Actually, there's this company called Brandwatch, which has sort of been around since 2010, I think. And I thought, well, I never really heard of SaaS at that point, to be honest. And I was still thinking of, getting back into media. But I pinged a few people there, met them for coffees. And it was such a kind of new and exciting proposition that I was immediately bought into it. So I joined, and admittedly, I did sort of have to take a bit of a step back. I joined as an individual contributor. Actually, which is at the time it was a bit of a risk, a calculated risk, because it was a pay cut and technically a demotion. But I figured, within 6 months I'd know if it was working or not. And since then, I never looked back. I mean, Brandwatch has been a huge sort of British software success story. For those that don't know it, sort of started in the social listening space, moved into social media analytics, and there's been a huge amount of kind of organic growth and M&A along the way. But it's been a real rocket ship of a journey. And I think in the 9 years I was there, I left earlier last summer. I think I did about 7 different jobs, because it was constantly evolving and adapting. We're going to touch on quite a bit of that later. But it's just been fantastic, and going through all those stages from sort of merging with competitors through to breaking the 100 million mark, becoming private equity owned, and then having to sort of scale up from 100, 200, it really have to learn an awful lot along the way. And it's a slightly crazy journey, but it's great. And I've just enjoyed it fantastically. And I felt really, great that, as I said, it was a calculated risk getting into SaaS, but it's really boomed. And now we're really into the sort of second era of SaaS, I think, with AI coming along. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 10 years, because I think we're going to see so much more disruption, and some of the biggest companies probably in British software come out of this, as well as ones adapt and evolve to it. So big journey, lots of different milestones through it, which we'll talk about later. But it has just been incredible, and I'm looking forward to continuing my career in SaaS and seeing what happens, until they probably have to kick me out.
Yeah, no, that's cool though. I mean, calculated risk. I mean, definitely right place, right time, isn't it? So, no, that's awesome. Just, I know I joked about not joked, but I mentioned about the Brighton thing. The Brighton tech scene is really kicking off. Startup scene, isn't it? Brandwatch is one of many quite successful startups down there now. Is that right?
Yeah, that is, and it's evolved. I mean, Sussex University has got a really good course for engineering. So I think a lot of it's come from the fact that there's actually a lot of dev resource down here. But pre-COVID, there was a difference between London salaries and Brighton salaries, and it was often seen as a sort of cheaper way to actually start scaling. That's much more evened out since COVID now. But it's a pretty buoyant scene, actually. I know quite a few people down here. And the truth is, actually, nowadays it doesn't really matter where you're based. You can start and you can scale into any kind of territory, really, whether you're working for Brighton or actually open offices or hire locally. But I think the university is the kind of area that kind of facilitated that. But I mean, I even at my kids' school gates, there are lots of people who are in tech, startups and more larger companies. So it's pretty big, actually. Definitely.
Yeah, and there's definitely something nice to be by the water, isn't there? Just something good for the soul. Okay, cool. Look, milestones, you touched upon it there. I always like to ask guests, do you see there any sort of real key milestones apart from that moment about getting into SaaS? If so, can you talk to those and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first milestone would be definitely sort of taking that risk to get into it. But I mean, the point is, I think there is not only it got me into SaaS, but I'm really glad I did it, because I think if you want to, start to lead a business, being an individual contributor, you learn to actually sell the technology. And that's really important. And unless you sell it, and you know how the SDR function works, you can sell commercial deals, you can sell enterprise deals, you can still sell strategic deals. It's really hard, I think, to go on and then subsequently lead those teams, because you need to have been kind of in the trenches, understanding exactly how it works. So I think that the reason it was a milestone is it got me into this fantastic sector, but also really meant that I actually understood how the business worked, was successful in it, and then helped facilitate the growth of my career thereafter. I would say the next milestone is probably my first VP job. And that was good. I was a VP of EMEA. And I looked after the agency team, and we had a brand team which sort of had commercial and sort of early stage enterprise in it. It was really more commercial at that point. But that was great. It was a smallish team of about 8 people. Though I'd led people in my kind of advertising career, this was different. And it was just really fun. I had a team in Berlin. We had a few people in France. There's a bit of travel involved. But I think it's really good introduction into understanding how the EMEA market works, how to buy and sell in different geos. And actually just lead in this kind of sector, as well as like going through getting the change and sort of actually making sure you hit your numbers. So I think for people who are in their earlier stage careers, everyone's always rushing to get to the next stage. And I always think you just need to actually sit and enjoy it. And I think this is where you really learn your craft. You learn how to manage people, but you also actually know how to manage process and understanding how to be data driven, as well as actually how to close deals and understand the full elements of the deal cycle, including legal and procurement. So take your time, enjoy it. But this is the kind of foundation that I think is going to project you to be more and more successful as you go. And I think, another milestone is like having got that foundational layer. I took on wider responsibilities in sort of APAC as well as EMEA, as well as running the partnership team. But the next stage of that was when I got my first global job. I did a global job for commercial account management and then a global job for enterprise. And that was another big step up as well, as having to manage large teams of sort of 80, 100 across multiple territories. You've also at that point private equity owned, so you've got to have be able to speak to your people, and it's less personal. With 8 people, you can have one-to-ones with them, but when you've got kind of 80 plus, you have to learn to run it in a different way. But also, you've got responsibilities. You have to be much more in front of the executive teams. You need to learn to speak to them and communicate, but also your investors as well, who are taking a keen interest in how kind of all the growth is going. So it's a different set of skills. But if you sort of scale up through that, it was adjustment, and sometimes it was difficult, and you had to learn a lot. But if you do it slowly but gradually, then you tend to actually kind of learn, and as well as having great mentors and leaders along the way who will help guide you on that journey. So I'd say those three milestones are sort of getting into it, first VP job, which is great, and then sort of the grown-up job of being a global SVP, which it takes a lot for me. It's a very consuming job, but very exciting at the same time.
Yeah. I bet it's all encompassing, isn't it? At that scale and size and responsibility. Mentors and managers. So you just touched upon it there. Anybody that really played a big part in that career development and personal growth?
Yeah, God, there are. I mean, we've I think mostly it's the CROs, because I was new to SaaS, I've been here 9 years, so I'm not that new, but, I did have to learn and absorb a lot. I think there's someone like Dan Freund, who's one of our CROs, who came around like sort of 2018, just when we'd done our first M&A. He really bought what they always sort of say software companies, go from like sort of, adolescent to teenager to young adults. And I think we were just coming out of that teenage stage, and he brought an element of professionalism, I think, to the company. And, I learned an awful lot of him, and also he supported me and backed me and ultimately kind of promoted me to my SVP job. So he's very helpful in facilitating that. But I think he made me understand how the world of SaaS works. So he's a big one. I mean, likewise, Scott Sorachak, who is another CRO of mine, when I was doing the bigger SVP job, he'd come from a bigger background in terms of running bigger companies, but he helped me kind of understand how you operate at scale. When you've got teams of 40, 60, 80 people, how you actually effectively do that. Don't get bogged down in the detail, learn to hire really good lieutenants who can actually, trust and empower to do your job. He was really vital in that. And then I think another person was Callie Tran, who was our most recent CEO, who was just, he led through a lot of change and some difficult times with the kind of inflationary period and layoffs. Sadly, we have been through a period of a couple of years of lots of layoffs. But I think the way that he managed to communicate, with the broader company in a way that kind of was empathetic and was just very clear and concise, I think taught me lessons in actually communication, because it's really important. How you communicate with your people, increasingly in this market, particularly in a kind of remote first world, which we were. People are going back to the office now, but I think we forget, particularly on Zoom or recordings like this, you lose that kind of element of, non-verbal cues. So being able to communicate clearly and concisely. And I think he taught me that. I mean, there are very many. So if anyone's listening, don't feel put out.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I mean, it is crazy times if you think back on it. I mean, I was, just even trying to describe to somebody, my son, maybe when he's a little bit older, about what COVID was all about. I mean, it's just mental, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think that we were locked indoors and, everybody suddenly had to work from home. No, that's really interesting that they contributed in those ways. You did touch a little bit about the Brandwatch journey there, but, certain milestones across, 25, 50, 100, and, obviously the juncture all the way up to 300 plus. in under 10 years is impressive. Like, tell a little bit more about the journey there and sort of what were the kind of force magnifiers along that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a kind of mix of organic growth and then M&A, I would
Yeah,
say. So sort of when I joined, it was kind of in the, 20-25 million, and by 2018 we did our first bit of M&A, and we were probably sitting on around 60, 75K there. And then we merged with Crimson Hexagon, which took us to kind of 100 million. But I mean, that was interesting as well because it took our headcount from around 350 people to 750. And, so that was our first bit of M&A. It was fascinating as well because, there's a huge amount of cultural and technological implications with that.
yeah,
And when you bring two companies together, we were directly competing with them.
yeah. I was going to say that. Yeah,
It's interesting because when you look back, of the M&As we've done at the time, we thought it was really complex and difficult, but actually it wasn't that difficult because in many ways we were selling the same thing and understood each other. But they were Boston based, we were Brighton based, so it's kind of
yeah,
getting along. But I mean, this was a turning point for the company because their back ends. There was kind of, I think Crimson Hexagon, the original tech came out of Harvard, and it was actually a very powerful back end. And we kind of like put their back end in the Brandwatch front end to create the new Brandwatch platform. And I think, that took about a year to do. It was very slickly done, but that really, got us up in the kind of the Forrester wave and set us on a new
yeah,
path in terms of kind of getting particularly kind of enterprise growth. So I say that was a pivot moment because it kind of grew the company. I think it gave us a bit of an edge from a technology perspective,
yeah,
set us on a good path, and then through 2018 to 21, the next kind of milestone is we were actually acquired by Platinum Equity, so for $500 million. So that was a great day, actually, 2021. I mean, the negotiation was done through COVID, which was quite interesting. But, I think everyone at some point would like an exit in their career. I was lucky enough to be part of the due diligence team, when they were kind of asking questions, I was on that. So it's kind of fascinating to be a part of that process, the kind of questions they ask, when you're trying to sell yourself, of course, and the difficult questions they often ask about what,
I
they know what's going well, but they want to know that what isn't going well,
bet.
improving.
Yeah, I bet.
And and it's a game of kind of show and tell, and you don't want to be dishonest, but at the same time, you want to give the kind of best impression. So
Yeah,
that was really good. But but then becoming private equity owned is a completely different thing. The VCs are always good and they're great at helping and supporting, but private equity tends to work in kind of shorter cycles in terms of what they want to do. And suddenly you've got a lot more people who are showing an interest, and they drop in, people and investors and advisors, which is actually all very helpful and really helps you kind of build and grow. But it takes a bit of getting used to, I think. Now, kind of once we got acquired, we were kind of left to our own devices to continue to grow. But about kind of a year later, we then merged with a company called Falcon. So that was also
yeah,
in their portfolio. So they're a social media management tool, and actually, as going from sort of the social listening to combine that together into more of a suite solution, it made perfect sense. But they were based in Denmark. So it's interesting working with them. They're actually a partner before that, so we did know them. They weren't complete strangers. And they were, I think at the time, they were probably more of a mid-market commercial machine, and we at the time, Brandwatch, were more of an enterprise machine. So it was interesting bringing those two companies together, because you had to bring the leadership teams together and then work out actually how do you build a kind of velocity and function that's going to be able to service across that kind of mid-market, SMB and enterprise function. And that was a good challenge actually to have. It also provided a huge amount of cross-selling opportunity because when you merge two
yeah,
companies together, you can sell Falcon Brandwatch and Brandwatch Falcon. So there was a good element of growth there. But then, of course, you have to have the kind of the technical build as well to make sure that you're actually building something that both customers want. So that wasn't challenging in itself. And then the sort of third bit of, I mean, not more M&A, but Cision, who was also part of the kind of portfolio, Platinum portfolio, their sort of media monitoring, and PR newswire is part of it. So
mm,
as I was kind of in the late 23 onwards, we were getting to work closer with them, and look at what the kind of the omni-channel view is, and that was interesting. But by that time, we were 1,500 people, and with I think Cision, it was going up to about 6.5. So again,
wow,
a massive growth of cultural differences. Suddenly, you've got offices all over the place. So I mean, it's a fascinating journey in that sense. But every time you sort of start to work closely, with other people in other companies, there's an awful lot that needs to be considered. And it's easy to become a bit insular, and you deal more with talking with your new colleagues. But of course, the trick is you really need to continue to talk to your customers and make sure that you're building new technology and advancements that keeps them happy, to keep an eye on the churn. So I mean, that was the growth trajectory, and it's still a phenomenally successful business.
Yeah.
And we'll go from strength to strength. I think that particularly the kind of the Brandwatch decision element, which is kind of carrying on now, which I think combined, probably the value of that's probably just under $1 billion. So, it's good. I mean, so I'm interested, wishing all my old colleagues the best of luck to see what they can
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, that's really cool. In the early days, when you were looking at sort of Crimson Hexagon, did you have an M&A team in the business, or was that just some brilliant bit of strategic insight from like the CEO, or what was the thought process there? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, it was the case of actually, it's always a difficult one because you could argue when you merge with a competitor, are you just
Yeah,
basically you could argue you're buying market share, but you're also buying churn. I think it was conversations that had gone on over a course of like 6 to 9 months, where actually
okay,
our CEO Giles Palmer had been speaking to them and sort of saying, does it make sense to actually merge at this point? Mainly because actually their back end technology was very good. Not to say that Brandwatchers
yeah,
wasn't. But the question is actually if you can actually, consolidate and build, at that point, the market was very much best in breed as opposed to suite solution. And we kind of had to pivot to suite when it became apparent, 3 years later that the market wanted suite solutions. But, when you're pushing on the best in breed element, actually that made sense. So it was kind of a false multiplier. And I think at the point that the kind of negotiation started, because at that point, I hadn't been involved in the process. I think everyone was quite surprised, like, my God, we're doing that.
yeah,
But it was a clever move, and I think
yeah.
definitely
Sounds like it.
paid off.
Yeah,
But I think it slightly shocked the market as well. But it's good,
yeah,
and
yeah,
looking
yeah,
forward
yeah.
to work with them.
Because on paper, you guys, as you described, are similar size, is what you
Yeah,
said, right, in terms of headcount. So it's interesting that behind closed doors to be like almost that vulnerable to say, look, this bit is great, but this bit isn't so great. If we went together, we could have something really special here, isn't it? Yeah, that's cool. Okay, look, in terms of when I speak to startups, there's always, they always want to go up market and try and get into the enterprise, but not always that's necessarily the right stage that they're at or the right time. What's your experience of that? And are there any advice you give to any of the leaders that may be looking to start that kind of initiative?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had enterprise teams. I've been in IC and run teams for many years. And often when we did a bit of M&A, sometimes the teams, or in redundancies left, and you'd had to rebuild them. The one thing I say is, you need a lot more time. You probably need to start sooner than you think,
Mm,
but don't be overly ambitious because if you think about it, the enterprise motion is very different. It's predominantly outbound, and there's an awful lot of work and preparation that needs to be done ahead of that. So you need to look at your sort of product market fit. I think you need to look at whether the potential and the amount of revenue you can get out of it, and then essentially you need building verticalized lists, of key verticals and segments that you can go into. What's the ideal customer profile? In addition to that, you then got to get the sort of SDR outbound machine up and running. So you need to start talking to these people. And I think what often happens is people hire enterprise AEs and then try and do everything
mm,
concurrently. And what's happening is they haven't got the kind of the critical infrastructure in ahead of time. And I would always say, when you hiring an account executive in enterprise can take a couple of months, it can then take up to 3 quarters to ramp them and for them to build enough pipeline. Now, anyone in leadership knows is that people start to get very sweaty if you've got a very expensive team who haven't converted any revenue. So my suggestion is by all means, hire an enterprise team, but you need to start planning it months, probably 6 months ahead of actually when you're going to hire, because you need to do all the work and the segmentation, the ICP. You then need to talk to marketing to get all the collateral ready and make sure that you're ready to go. Start the SDR motions, building and communicating with them, and then start hiring. And I think that way, actually, you'll be ready to sort of get the A's in place, onboard them, and they're likely to be more successful more quickly. There's the one thing, the one pressure you're going to get, particularly if hiring A's in America, for example, it isn't cheap. So you've got a
yeah,
huge overhead in terms of their salaries, the leadership can see that the pipeline is growing, but you might not get any conversions. And enterprise deals can take 6 to 12 months to close, because it's easy sometimes to get a commitment from them, and it's a large lump of money, 3, 4, 500K, but the legal and procurement process can take months as well. And that's another
Yeah.
skill that you need to train them. So, you're not using your paperwork, you're using their MSAs. So you also then, depending on your size, need to make sure that you've got a legal team in place, because this is something that won't do. Otherwise, you're going to have to outsource that at a vast expense of a salaried lawyer per hour. So all I sort of saying is you need to think through every manifestation of the kind of the journey that you're going to have to take to close a deal, map it out, and start ahead of when you are. And probably the first, hire. Don't underhire, but don't overhire. If you think the enterprise is there, if you just book one enterprise deal, that doesn't mean that there's another 10 there. But you could still hire
Yeah.
maybe one AE in the UK, one AE in America, one AE in APAC, and then give them sort of 3 to 6 months to kind of road test them and see how their pipeline is scaling. And at that point, I think you can start to commit and consequentially or sequentially start to hire more people. I think the mistake people make is like, let's go big. We're going to have 5 here, 5 there, 5
Yeah.
there, and we just make them work. And it's up to them to create their own pipeline. But I think you need to scale in a more considered way, and you're all likely to get success. And with the fewer people, you can wrinkle out all the problems that you'll have. And it might be the
Yeah.
case that, the MQL to SQL, keeping the leads warm, you're outbound. There's an awful lot to learn. Now, once you're up and running, it's better to learn, iterate, build would be my way forward. That's what I've learned along the way.
Yeah. Okay, and you touched upon the US, which is obviously very enticing for everybody in terms of market share and scale and opportunity. How did you experience that with Brandwatch being a UK based business? What were kind of the learnings and opportunities and challenges of that market?
I mean, it's a really important pivot. I think in terms of like revenue, that's certainly where a lot of the opportunity for the majority of companies are. And I think when I joined, the revenues were probably early on it was about sort of 80% EMEA, 20% US.
Yeah.
But by the time I left, it's probably switched to sort of 65 NA and the rest EMEA and APAC. So it was
Okay.
successful. I think we opened an office in New York. But I think you've got to be really thoughtful, again, because it's high risk but high reward. The A's are expensive, particularly if you're hiring in New York, or even over on the West Coast. So I think the main thing to do is, I would say, do your homework. Those first hires are going to be really critical. Particularly if, say, your leadership team is in the UK, and you're going to have to trust someone on the East Coast to do that work for you. So I think, you have to be careful when you hire to make someone, if there's a remote first, that they're actually capable of, self-starters. So that kind of way of actually getting them through the process, you need to be confident in what they're doing. But the other thing, as we touched on before, is you need to do your homework. What does the segmentation like? Which states, where the company is going to sit, that will, if you're looking at pharma, for example, that will be certain areas of the States versus technology, which is more West Coast. So again, you need to do a lot of intelligence and research to make sure why you're doing it. Not that we're going to hire someone and see how it goes, which I often see a lot of companies doing. But the positive I will say is that the US is quite good at buying software. It's a very mature market, and I think they understand SaaS generally, particularly in the enterprise, and as much in the commercial area. So actually, the deal velocity you can get once you get it right can be fairly good. But I think where I've seen people fail again is they tend to overhire. They've got huge excessive costs in terms of salaries. They're not building the sufficient pipeline. So it comes back to that point we made previously, is make sure you've got the infrastructure and the tech stack in place. You've got the kind of the inbound, if it's commercial, and outbound going if it's enterprise. So make sure that's in place and then start to make the hires. It's all about making sure that you do groundwork, build the foundations, and then do the sequential hiring, because it's going to give you the best chance of success. And it is, in many ways, it can be easier than Europe, right? Because everyone speaks English, and that makes a difference. And the States are very different, of course, in their own ways and personalities. But you don't have the kind of the language barriers that you might have in Europe, which means you have to hire people who are bilingual or higher in kind of territories there. So EMEA has its own challenges, but America, I think the biggest cost, the overhead of salaries is a big one. And then just not necessarily building that foundational excellence that's going to give you the best chance of success.
The talent pool as well in the US is obviously very mature and good in general, isn't it? You
Yeah,
know, uh, did you? I assume with the roles that you held, you spend quite a lot of time on the ground in the States. Did you? Did you go
yeah.
over there and yeah,
An awful lot. We had
yeah,
offices in Boston and New York, so I was over there probably every 3 or 4 weeks on occasion. So it's good.
yeah,
I love spending time in the States, but yeah, it was kind of
yeah,
but that's the other important thing when you are running teams. You do need to go and see them and kind of check in and make sure we're doing things. But in the end, we hired more remotely down the eastern seaboard. Which kind of worked, and that's another thing to consider is the cost of office space as well, particularly if
mm,
you're in Manhattan. Pretty much anywhere can be very expensive. It depends what culture you want to build, whether it's kind of hybrid or remote. But your point on the talent pool is a very valid one. There's a lot of what I call the kind of professional individual contributor, and these are often people. They
yeah,
might be in their kind of 30s, 40s. They've been in management, but actually didn't like it and just want to go back and become
yeah.
an individual contributor. But they understand perfectly how it works. They're very driven. They work really hard. And they're just excellent. And you see these. It doesn't have to. The age doesn't matter, but you're seeing this from people in their 20s right through. So there's some exceptional talent out there, without a doubt, but it's a very competitive market. So I
It
think you've
is.
got to make a compelling offer to get the right people.
It is. It is. I mean, I'm sure you had a great product and message to bring to market. How did you structure? Was it individual contributors and then build? Did you build the teams around those people? And also, second part of the question is, I guess it was pre-COVID, but were they remote or did you build offices that they sat within?
Yeah, we did. I mean, pre-COVID, the big office, Crimson Hexton's big office was in Boston, and we had a lot
Okay.
a lot of people there, including that kind of inside sales team, and the enterprise team. We still had an office in New York, but once kind of COVID struck, we went to sort of remote optimized, and from that we did start, hiring, down the eastern seaboard. Now we still, when the world reopened, there was still offices in New York and Boston. But by that
Yeah.
point, actually, the kind of team. So then it's a matter of getting the teams, together on a regular basis to make sure that you're kind of building that culture and people can actually meet
Yeah.
each other. But Brandwatch had always used Zoom, Slack, and email is its sort of central nervous system. So actually pivoting during COVID wasn't that difficult. But it depends. I mean, I do like in-office culture personally, but I think there are a huge amount of benefits from hiring remotely as well in terms of the access to the talent,
Yeah.
um, as well as people who sometimes had to leave the workforce. If someone had a baby, for example, and being in the office, was difficult, you find you can get them back in, and they're very good. So we found a lot more talent as a result of that. But it's difficult. It depends on what you want as a company and where you're going. You can go
Mm.
around in circles in this conversation in terms
We
of
can, yeah. I have it every other day, probably with different clients and candidates. It's certainly a big divide in the space, I think. Um, I think one of your more senior roles was in channel and alliance, Charlie. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right? Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I see companies do this very, very well, and I see companies do it very badly or not at all. How important was it for you as a business, and what are the kind of some of the learnings of that part of the function?
Yeah, I mean, it was hugely important. I mean, the term partnership is quite broad. We had sort of product partnerships with the likes of kind of Twitter, Facebook,
Yeah.
which generally was sat there. But, in terms of the partnerships in commercial, the go-to-market function, it was really kind of a form of indirect sales. And for us, that sat in two areas, like independent software vendors and
Mm,
value-added resellers. So essentially getting people to resell your technology. It was huge. I mean, as the team scaled, I mean, I looked after it. I actually ran the team for a year or so and then had it reporting into me. I mean, I think when I took over, it was around sort of 5-6% of the total ARR, but it got up
mm.
to as much as 14. So
So,
it was a pretty big part of the business. But the way we looked at it, it's you know the way I look at it is that it's someone helping you to paint the fence, particularly with value-added resellers, is you can't have boots on the ground everywhere. So the way we looked at it is like geos where we didn't have offices that weren't
Mm,
tier one to us, such as Latin America, quite large parts of Asia Pacific, and say somewhere like South Africa. We looked for partners there, and what we did is we trained them and we enabled them, and they sort of sold our software. There was a rev cut to it, so everyone was happy. And it still works when you look at it, versus paying commission and the cost of marketing into a region, the customer acquisition cost, even through a partner, if there's a rev share there, is still actually pretty good. But I think that
yeah,
the main learning from that is it worked, but you really need sales on board as well, because you want to make sure that you don't cannibalize your own base. I think that's a huge element to it. But there are people in sales who think that they should own every single lead that comes in, because often if we did have leads that came into those regions, we would give them to our resellers. So there was a bit of butting of heads sometimes. Now, when I was running the sales teams and the partner teams, it doesn't matter, because I could be the arbiter of that conversation. But when we did some of our M&A, there was a bit of a difference of opinion about whether partnerships is something that we should pursue. Um, I'm a big fan of it. I think it's really important, and I think for me, it's just basically a force multiplier.
yeah,
The trick is if you're going to get them to resell your software, there is an element of control freakery. You've got to trust someone to do that. So what we
yeah,
would do is we would try and create packages and an enablement process which really simplified it. So actually, when you gave it to someone, you went to train someone in another company, it wasn't overly complex. In larger enterprise deals, we would either co-sell, or actually say, okay, we'll give you a referral, but they should come to us. So you can kind of control elements of it. But overall, I think partnerships and alliances is a hugely important part of a business. And I would recommend, if people are thinking about it, go for it. But again, as with enterprise, do your homework. Why are you doing it, and what's the price of it? I think the final point is that finding partners isn't difficult. Everyone wants to generally speak to you and kind of like have their fingers in pies to generate revenue. Finding good partners is,
mm,
and and by the end of it, we probably had 5 or 6 key VARs who I think drove most of the revenue. And we had excellent relationships with them, but not all partners are equal. So that's another thing to think about.
yeah. Curious about the thought process on taking the role when it was presented. I'm sure you had lots of opportunities. Why did you decide at that point in your career to go into partner channel and alliance?
Well, I think at that point it was shortly after the Crimson Hexagon merger, and there was a bit
Okay.
of shuffling around, and I think this role came up, and I just thought actually it looks really interesting. And again, it was another one of those kind of calculated risks where I
Yeah.
thought actually this is going to kind of I've done the IC bit, I've done a
Yeah.
couple of VP jobs. Actually, this is going to round off a bit of experience, and I saw it personally as just kind of not fleshing out the CV, but just giving me a different set of skills that I could go, and it was a good job. I mean, it was great fun. I spent most of the year flying around the world, visiting lots of partners in all over places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Utah, Australia. I can't think of any more. So I mean, it was a fun, exciting job, and I'm really glad I did it. And it kind of gave you a different appreciation of moving away from that sales. It's interesting because I think management and executives are far more interested in that kind of sales job. So you might
Yeah.
become slightly less important in their eyes, but I think still as a skill set element, I enjoyed it. It's one of the really fun year, and I just learned so much from it as well.
Yeah. I think it marries up, doesn't it? I guess people are getting a sense of your personality that, you touched upon about being in the trenches and doing the IC job to get, I guess, the credibility and the perspective of what it's like with the team. I guess spending a year doing the role itself, gives you a great level of empathy to the
Yeah.
challenges and the, of the team once they fell into your kind of leadership and management. That's cool. Um, okay, look, scaling as you did in the M&A and growing at the pace you did, I'm sure you had to look at new offices and countries in Europe, especially. You touched upon there that US is kind of intact and EMEA has its own unique set of challenges like localization and I
Yeah.
guess legal and just access to talent. And if we talk about like the German speaking market, the DAC or any of the others, if you want, what were your learnings and experience of those projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's good. We had offices or have offices in Paris, I think, Berlin.
Yeah,
We had people in Madrid as well. I mean, and again, COVID kind of touches on that because I think a lot of people did have a much more kind of European reach. Now, my view is that, people like being sold to in their own language,
yeah,
and they like people who can go and visit them. I think this is true, and it certainly helps sales. Um, I think, since COVID, when we went remote, people then shut down offices, and there's a bit of a move now to sort of hire bilingual speakers out of a hub, say like London. And to be honest, part of this is driven by the fact that actually the contracts in Europe, shall we say, the rights you get after 6 months are similar to what you might have to wait for 2 years and don't have in America. So I think, sadly, living in this time of like reductions in force and right sizing, companies often want the flexibility. And it's a bit of a sad indication of the last couple of years, I would say, because it feels like the tail wagging the dog. But I kind of get it, but people are building these hubs. But my view is actually it is best to hire local if you can. And I think if you are a company thinking of expanding into new geos, but you do need to think through it. Opening a new office, there's the local business rates, taxation. If
yeah.
you want to move someone from the London office to live in Madrid, there's kind of visa requirements and all that. So there are lots of costs associated with it. Um, you know, and then there are also the kind of the contracts that people sign, often mean that if there is a reduction in force, then then it can be, the redundancy payments can be quite high. So I think, if you're a business owner, you need to think through this. But I think you can still tap into a market, and particularly with Germany, for example, I know that having German speakers from a German office will really accelerate those sales, and it did for us. It's the fifth biggest economy in the world. So it's almost kind of, be dumb not to do that. But I kind of get it. But I think if it wasn't for COVID, the kind of the rise of hybrid or remote working, I think we'd see far more offices, or hubs across Europe for SaaS companies. But I think the kind of inflationary period of massive costs of servicing the debt, in addition to the hybrid working, has made people second guess that. But maybe it will come back. I don't know.
2025 is the year, I hear.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, no, that's was the German. If we just talk about the German offices or region, was that organic hiring for Brandwatch, or was that did you become owners of offices and teams through M&A? What was the journey that you
No,
experienced, or both?
it was always a strong presence actually from Brandwatch. It was one of
Okay.
the key one of the key territories that grew pretty quickly actually. Because we had also technology and services. So we had a strong
Mm,
kind of professional services team out there and customer success. A lot of it was also through the customers. We had some big enterprise German customers. So often that's the other thing is if you book a big client who's spending an awful lot of money, you need to make sure that you've got people and resource who can service it. So that will often drive the
mm,
hiring element there. So yeah, it was and it remains. But I think that a lot of people, certainly when I talk to people like yourself and other people in SaaS, it's always the German conundrum, and I think the
yeah.
market's super competitive out there as well, isn't it? So you've got
Very.
massive inflation of AE salaries, and then there's a bit of a drive to go back to office and people wondering whether they can do that. And equally, I know people who want to hire people who speak French and German and English in London, and have
Mm,
them service multiple territories. But these people are very difficult to find as well, or they're in massively high demand. So I think, as you say, 25, I think people need to sort of place their bets and work out actually how they're going to scale their businesses. Because I think the money will come back in. And if people feel more confident in the growth trajectory, that means the reductions in forces may, not be as common as they
yeah.
have been, or it might be not as volatile as it's been in the last few years.
Yeah. No, I must admit, yeah, I just give Germany as an example. I know we could talk at length about France and the other markets, but I do feel like leaders, um, for what is a mature economy and opportunity, especially US companies, are really scratching their head about how to tap into some of that market share at times. Um, for all the reasons that you discuss, I completely agree with all those points. But um, yeah, yeah, no, it's certainly one to that we could. I mean, I have done an episode purely on it, in fact, with a guy called Alex Wilcom, who's done it a few times for foreign software companies and some of the learnings that he's made from that. But no, that's cool. Um, M&A's obviously been a big part of the journey. You mentioned Crimson Hexagon and Falcon, and then obviously, am I right to say the final one was Cision acquired Brandwatch, or was the other way around? Is that what
Yeah, it
was
was
the?
part of the Platinum Equity portfolio, so we've kind of
Yeah,
always worked alongside. So it's kind of
yeah,
M&A in the sense of it's increased increased alignment of working alongside them to kind of cross sell into it.
yeah, yeah. So how, with all of that change, I'm sure a lot of positive came from that, clearly in terms of like cross selling stuff. But how did you create like a unified culture and a, a good culture within those teams?
Yeah, it's I think it's difficult. The change management's really difficult, I think. And as we touched on earlier, you've got that cultural element, and then you've also got that technological element, and that creates an element of inertia. Um, I think within a business, and I think a lot of people just don't sit very well with that. So I would say that this is where I think servant leadership comes into play. Is that people are going to be feeling quite uncertain. Often when there's a bit of M&A, people also, there is often few people lose their jobs. Not always the case, but
Mm,
you do have sort of say efficiencies that needs built in. So as it gets announced, there's an initial surge of excitement, and then people start to get worried. So and if you don't fill that um, vacuum, or if they create the vacuum and there's no communication, people start to make their own assumptions. So I think communication, or really good communication, is really critical. And I think our businesses, we're always good at that, making sure you get people on all hands, but then making sure you disseminate through that people are getting their teams together and talking about that. But I think apart from that, you just need to, as I said, that servant leadership. I think it's about empathy and listening. But what I can say is you kind of need to embrace the chaos a bit. And the way I always frame it with my teams is like you learn more in difficult times than you do in easy times. And so this
yeah,
isn't going to be easy. We're going to have to work with new systems and processes. We're going to have new colleagues. There's going to be a period of sort of dissonance and uncertainty. But this is really where you actually start to mature and build expertise that you don't necessarily have, and it's going to serve you very well in the future. So you kind of reframe it as an opportunity for a growth mindset is the way you can do it. And I think people tend to lean into that kind of thing. But it's the element. But the other thing is you just got to listen to people and have kind of like an open door. Even though at some of the points we were during COVID, we couldn't do that. But it involves a lot of conversation. Now, some people are going to whinge and will never be happy. Um,
yeah,
and sometimes you do have to be slightly tough on that, which is like, well, it's happened. We're not going back. But some people might have some very good points, and I think that's why you have to kind of open your mind and your ears and do that. But ultimately, you're working for a business, and it's always the case. The old analogy is flying a plane, and changing the wings at the same time. From a leadership perspective, you still need to hit your numbers, and the team still needs to perform. So you need to sort of get that balance between, okay, let's keep the show on the road, let's make sure that we're listening to you and we understand where all the problems are, but let's also use this as an opportunity to grow, develop, and actually have some fun. Because actually merging within a company is great. You meet lots of new, interesting,
yeah,
fantastic people. There are clash of egos, there always will be. And there is a point where even though each side will claim that they're low ego and they're willing to come to the table, each side definitely thinks the way they do it is the best way. In terms of sales or process or anything. So,
yeah,
and that's often where most of the tension comes from. So I think it's also leadership's responsibility to try and sort of, calm everyone down and make sure that people are open-minded, conversations
yeah,
go on, and all that kind of stuff. But it's good. I mean, I look back on it now, it's slightly rose-tinted spectacles because like I felt and I enjoyed it and I learned so much. But there were definitely moments which were hugely stressful
yeah. I
because
bet. I
it's chaotic,
bet.
right?
I bet. I bet. Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, you talked there about with all of this kind of change and chaos and stuff. There's obviously still revenue numbers and targets and pressure to hit certain year-on-year growth and quarter-on-quarter growth numbers. So sales execution must have played a big part of
Yeah.
that. How did you drive that sort of high bar in the teams that you looked after?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really, I think any leader you'll speak to, I mean, it's got to be about accountability. Um, I think is the main way of doing it. So I think it's about keeping, during those stressful times, about keeping people on track. But I think the way you communicate through that is there's got to be a high level of authenticity in what you're sort of saying, and I think transparency. But in terms of keeping people on track, I think they need to know what their mandate is and what the expectation is. But I think that this goes through the culture of any decent sales team. I always say that high performing sales teams, don't happen organically. They have to be built. And if you think of any like high performing sports team or an orchestra or something like that, it's all about that kind of commitment to doing the brilliant basics, working off the foundations and executing flawlessly. So even when you're going through difficult times of stage, even with the M&A, which creates a lot of noise, you need to keep focused on actually them doing their job in an effective way. And often people find comfort in that as well, because they can go back and forget about all the chaos outside and just get on with the sales process. So it is a bit of a juggling act in that sense. But I would say that, the reason that, I think, being successful is about delivering those results. In this day and age, it is about being data driven and really making sure that that process that you follow is actually followed. You're keeping an eye on the forecasting. People aren't being distracted by things. But in order to lead through that, as I sort of said, it's about transparency, authenticity. But if you've done that ahead of time and your teams feel valued and empowered, generally they'll work through for you. If you haven't got that, then it can be a bit trickier, and people just they worry about the small stuff rather than looking at it. If that makes sense.
I know you're doing some very valuable consulting sort of fractional work. So without giving away too much your secret sauce or doing any free consulting for us on Tier today, but I mean, if you were to join an earlier stage business, let's say hypothetically sort of sub 20 million ARR, yeah,
Yeah.
and you had to kind of look at 5 different things, let's say, to get in place and make sure they're world class, what would they be and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And yeah, I mean, I think that is. I mean, I have been having some of these discussions recently, actually, and I think what startups, there's an element of chaos to startups. I think which is the energy that people thrive off, and the fact that you're building something from scratch. But I think what they tend to do is they do things concurrently rather than consecutively, and it all needs
Yeah.
to be thought through. So the things I would do is the first thing I think is really important is the tech stack and operations. Any go-to-market operation needs a good tech stack, and a way to measure success. You need to measure what's in the pipeline. You need to measure deal conversion rates. This will give you the kind of the North Star, as it were, of all the deal metrics that are going through. And you'd be surprised how many of them actually don't have this set up sufficiently. So again, it comes to that point you made before, that this is your kind of foundational building block which you go off. So I think the tech stack is a really important one to get right, and that needs to be thought through. The next one is the kind of demand generation engine, and this leads into the third point, which is marketing content, is that you need a decent demand generation engine bringing it in, because everything is about, you need leads, and particularly in those kind of high growth startups, everything is about getting from 2 to 3 to 5. That will unlock the next round of funding. So if you've got that foundational sort of tech stack, and then you've got the demand generation engine running, you're going to be ahead of time as well. But then also you need a decent amount of marketing content and collateral. It's amazing how people don't think how much is needed. The question is, what are you actually communicating to the market? And if you have a whole range of use cases, do you have anything to kind of support this and go back? So I'd say that's a different one, and that takes time. And sometimes they don't have a full marketing team set up, so people are going to have to kind of hack it together. But you still need to look at that and do it in a way. So I think tech stack, the demand generation, the marketing content to support it. And then I think the next element is bringing on SDR teams. So it goes back to that point of, like, before you hire, say, that first enterprise AE, you need all this. The same with the SDR teams, is you need them to either kind of looking at kind of qualifying inbound leads or doing outbound, and I think building that up. So it is about progressively building that stack to create the success that goes forward. And I think, at that point, often what people do is they think, oh, well, we're scaling, we need more help, let's just hire a few AEs. The AEs are in seat and going, okay, well, what do I need to do? How do I get onboarded? Where are my leads? And of course, they're going, oh, we're working that out. But if you'd actually given it a bit of forethought and built it ahead of time, you're going to put yourself in a much better place to do that. So I think those are the things that I would put in space. Tech stack, the demand generation engine, get that up and running. build that marketing content ahead of time, and you're going to lead a lot more than you think you do, because and also your tone of voice and everything. Then get the SDRs in, get them working to get leads up, and then the AEs can come in. Would be my the way I look at it.
Yeah. Okay. AI is obviously a sprawling topic at the moment and here to stay. But how have you seen any really kind of cool use cases or applications for go-to-market leveraging AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I don't use Google anymore. I just use ChatGPT or Perplexity. So, I mean, it's kind of like, it's amazing the pace at which
Yeah.
it's moved. But I think, generative AI is just one element of it. I think it's actually the predictive AI, particularly for go-to-market, that's going to have the biggest effect. So if you look at the go-to-market function now, from the top, middle, bottom of the funnel through to the MQL to SQL to qualification, AI is already and will continue to touch every point of that. And it's going to make it much more efficient and effective. And it's going to give you data and intelligence that you probably don't even know at the moment. There are tools like Clary, which I think are doing it really, really well as
Yeah.
well. Actually, just make sure that you can see where all your revenue leak is, for example. And it's impossible. Everything that Salesforce probably should be, to my mind. So I think the AI, I think, from a go-to-market function, it's not going to replace salespeople. There will probably be AI SDRs, which is a big
Yeah.
topic at the moment. There's debate that some people say they're rubbish, some people say they're right. But as we know with AI, the prompts you write are as good as the output you get. So that's going to be, I think, sales rooms are another thing that's coming up. And I think
Yeah.
that using a lot of AI, I think, will be an element. So I think, I think it's not going to replace people. Salespeople will always need to sell for the time being. Human interaction is important, but it's going to take away all the pain. The days of spending 2 hours putting together a deck, will be gone,
Yeah.
because you can whack one together with the variety of decks out there. Just researching a company on ChatGPT now, you can do in 3 minutes, just with the right prompt, so you can understand their pains, problems, and history. And then I think all the predictive stuff, which I think is going to be the game changer, will analyze individual rep behavior and kind of give you an indication as a sales leader or an individual, actually, whether you're kind of fooling yourself or if actually this deal is going to close in that time. So I think, it's exciting, I think, because the technology will enhance performance, not replace it.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, I know a lot of people are worried. Worried probably is the right word. About that. So it's an interesting perspective there. Moving from you went from IC to first line to second line leadership over your career, and a few other roles in between. What was the advice you would give somebody that was making that transition?
Yeah, we kind of briefly touched on it earlier. It's like those first early leadership jobs are so much fun. And I really want to take point. It's take time to enjoy it.
Mm.
Don't rush through. It's good to be ambitious, but I think the problem is, like, what did I hear the other day? Like, comparison is the thief of joy,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I've heard that. Yeah,
You look on LinkedIn, and it seems to me that there's always some young hotshot who's doing so much better than you. But the question is, like, generally in my experience, you've generally been doing a job between 6 and 12 months before you actually get given that job, and that's probably a good thing, right? Because if you suddenly got put into it, you're not necessarily guaranteed that you're going to be successful. So my advice would be, like, take your time, hone your craft. It's just to say, when you've got a team of like 6 or 8 people, it's so much easier to have one-to-ones with them, but you can really actually get your management style, honed and perfected, be empathetic, listen, because if you suddenly got stuffed into a job looking after 80 people, you're not going to know how to do that. So you do need to have that kind of gradual growth in order to get there. And also the question is, be careful what you wish for. I think, the question is, a lot of people just think that kind of positions and titles, it might appeal to your ego, but the question is that what you really want? So
yeah,
don't just think that kind of climbing the greasy pole is something that everyone's happy with. The jobs get progressively all consuming and sometimes very stressful. Not everyone is particularly good with that. But if that's for you, then that's great. So the question is, like, what do you actually want out of your career? And the other thing is, like, as I've done, in terms of pivots, careers aren't linear. You can join a
yeah,
company, scale it, you can go back to a startup, you could move into partnerships, you could go into customer success. It doesn't matter. It's all
yeah,
about rounding that element. And certainly, when I've recently been talking to companies, and they look through my CV, that it gives you, it's like lived experience, but the stories are more interesting because you've done a huge range of different things. So I
Yeah.
would say, don't be afraid to try something different, right? That's the main thing. Look at your career as a kind of chapter in each book, and what is the next chapter going to do, and then you can kind of build it out from that.
Yeah.
But the other thing is just don't take it too seriously. We're not saving babies here. Not to say that you can't be serious in the way you approach your job, but
Yeah.
you can have a bit of fun along the way with it. Software sales is great, but sometimes you
Yeah.
can get a bit bogged down in the stress, and kind of a bit of levity is needed sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's look forward to 2025. I know we joked a bit earlier about this is the year, the big one, but what's your actual perspective on the state of SaaS and like the Martech space, if you will, in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think SaaS is back. We've had a pretty rough few years.
Wait, yeah, yeah,
I'm sure we said this time last year. No, I think it
yeah,
is. Of course, there's been a certain election in America, which I think will have implications on it. I mean, Wall Street seemed to be happy with Trump back in there. But if you think like the VCs and PE haven't really been doing their job for the last couple of years, mainly because they've had to
mm,
service mountains of debt. The inflation rates have come down, so certainly from a macro perspective, that should free up cash. But that's what their existence is about, speculate to accumulate. So they need to start spending. And I think also we're seeing a boom of kind of AI coming in. Now, don't get too bogged down. AI is the new hot sector, but everything is AI at the moment. So there are some AI companies that will probably be the next big thing. I mean, look at OpenAI or a whole host of other stuff coming out. But don't
yeah,
jump on the bandwagon. AI is also going to improve and enhance a lot of what we call the kind of older school tools. The more boring tools that you might call compared to AI are still going to be important. People still need, to buy fintech or martech to actually service their needs. So I think from a career perspective, I would look at companies, and don't just instantly think, well, I have to join an AI startup because that's where all the money is. As with anything, there are an awful lot of them out there. Not all of them will be successful. And a lot of the kind of better established companies are probably now in a position to use AI to actually
yeah,
increase efficiencies.
yeah. Yeah, no, great. Charlie, that was awesome. We're just running up to time now. So look, we've got a little bit of, as always, a bit of a quick fire, fast finger first kind of questions, right? I don't know if you've seen any of these episodes before, but we'll give this a go. So first thing that comes into your head, okay? Um, Favorite piece of tech or app you are using now?
I mean, well, from a professional perspective, definitely Clary, but
Yeah,
I'm all about ChatGPT at the moment, and
yeah,
Perplexity. Yeah.
yeah. I feel like that's going to be a constant in. I need to change the question. Night at the disco or night at the restaurant?
My dancing's terrible, so definitely restaurant. It's kind of like dancing in a restaurant.
Favorite food?
I love dim sum, actually. It's kind of I'm really keen on that. So there's only one place in Brighton, so whenever I go down to London, I have to go to Chinatown. But,
Okay, cool. Favorite movie?
um, I love Interstellar. Big fan of Christopher Nolan, but I think that bridges the gap between cerebral blockbuster for me.
Okay, cool. If you were to describe yourself in 2 words, what would it be and why?
Whoa, that's a good one. I think I'm going to go with calculated risk. We've said it enough time in this, but I think it's my strategy of life. You can take risks, but you need to think them through.
Yeah, okay. Um, what's your proudest moment in your career to date?
Um, oh, yeah, I think it probably actually been acquired. When you sold Brandwatch, I think that's what everyone aims for. It was such a great feeling, and actually have being a part of the business that grew that. So that was good. So it's the only exit I've had. Hopefully there'll be another one in the future. But that
Yeah,
is
I hope so too.
it's a good moment.
Yeah. Favorite place that you visited on holiday or just generally visited in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of diving over the years, less since the kid. But there's an island in Borneo called Sipadan, and it's
Okay.
absolutely some of the best diving in the world. But I can't tell you how breathtakingly beautiful it is. It's in the middle of the ocean, and it's just surrounded by sharks, turtles, everything. Absolutely
Wow.
beautiful. It's kind
Sounds
of
cool. I get some funny answers to this last one, but we'll go with it. Now, what's your guilty pleasure if you have one?
oh god, it's kind of like actually trash TV. And I've started watching this thing with the kids. Well, they started watching it. It's called Is It Cake? And it's where like you have
Okay.
to guess whether this thing is actually real or it's cake. But there are a whole range of these terrible programs on Netflix. Like one of them is like you have to build a robot cake that drives over an assault course. But I always go like, oh God, this is like rotting your brain, and then watch 3 episodes ridiculous.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Okay, cool. Hey, Charlie, it's been great. Look, thank you for just, sharing some of that insight. That's been awesome just to hear more about your story and obviously the business that you were part of for 10 years or so. Now, anybody that's watching this and has got this far, right, if they want to get in touch with you, just to kind of get to know you a little bit more, or even I know that you are potentially, in the market at the moment, looking for something, your new
Yeah.
gig. What's the best way to do that?
I just like hit me up on LinkedIn, send me a DM, and I'll send over my email, and we can go from there, or just have a quick chat on the phone. But keen to chat to everyone and anyone. It's be good to have a chat. And if you've got any questions, if you're early on in your career or just want some advice, by all means, I'm happy to kind of help out. We were all there once, so kind of give something back.
Yeah, sounds great, mate. Thank you, Charlie. Thanks for taking the time.
Not at all. Thank you very much. Good chat.